Have you ever heard someone cry in the middle of the night? Not from sadness, not from pain, but a raw, primal scream, the kind that makes you feel like the whole world is collapsing inside the chest of an 8-year-old child. That night, in an old hotel tucked away in Vermont, with snow falling thick enough to bury the front steps, a scream shattered the silence. No one dared go up to the third floor. No one, except her. Rachel Green had only been working there for 4 days. She wasn't a nurse. She wasn't a therapist. She was just a hotel cleaning staff, and a woman who once lost a little brother to a condition society fails to understand: autism. She didn't knock on the door of room 306. She walked in, and what she saw, you won't be able to look away from. There was a boy, Lucas, the only heir to the hotel owner. He was banging his head against the wall, again and again, not screaming, not resisting, just repeating one haunting sound over and over, like he was begging anyone to hear him. Rachel said nothing. She simply sat down, reached out her hand, and signed a single word: safe. No one had taught her that. There's no manual that says, when a child breaks down, just hold out your hand and say nothing. But Lucas paused, just for a second. But it was enough. It was the beginning. And here's the strangest part. She wasn't supposed to be there. She had no clearance, no right to enter that room. But if she hadn't, Lucas might have become just another quiet tragedy, lost in a world already too loud to truly listen. This isn't a fairy tale. It's real. A story about a woman no one believed in, a child who couldn't speak, and a powerful father losing the one thing he loved most. Don't look away, because after this moment, welcome to the boy in room 306. Her name was Rachel, years old, housekeeping staff, no fancy degrees, no impressive RA. If you asked her, she'd simply say she needed a job, a steady paycheck, and a warm place to stay through the brutal Vermont winter. But the truth was never that simple. Rachel wasn't a stranger to panic, to screams no one could decode, to the vacant stares of children looking straight through the world, as if there was no place in it for them. She had lived with that silence for 11 long years. Tommy, her younger brother, had nonverbal autism. No doctor could explain why he never spoke. No school ever kept him longer than 3 months. Rachel's family used to live in a modest home on the outskirts of a small Texas town. Just her brother, and their mother, who carried everything on her back after their father walked out. And in the stillness of night, just like that night when Rachel first heard Lucas cry, Tommy would crawl under the kitchen table, arms wrapped around his head, his little body curled up like a leaf in the wind. No one could get close, no one, except Rachel. She never spoke. She would simply sit with him quietly, patiently, and make a sign her grandmother once taught her. A circle on the chest, a tap to the forehead. Safe. When words failed, presence became the only language that mattered. Tommy died in the summer he turned 11. A seizure in the middle of the night. Rachel and her mother couldn't make it to the hospital in time. After that, something inside her world froze. 3 years later, her mother fell ill, chronic lung disease, medical bills piled high. Rachel dropped out of school, started waitressing, then moved into the hotel industry for the better pay and the free housing. No one in management knew about Tommy. She never told them, not out of shame, but because every time she spoke his name, it tore open a wound that time had never managed to close. But that night, when she saw Lucas, the boy in room 306, Rachel knew her pain hadn't been for nothing. She saw Tommy in that gaze, in those cries, in the way Lucas hugged himself like a cocoon no one could break. Some memories don't need words to come alive. They return through instinct, through trembling hands, through the quiet courage it takes to sit beside a child who's screaming without a voice the world understands. Rachel didn't need to be a professional. She only needed to be there, silent, steady, long enough for Lucas to know he hadn't been left behind. And sometimes, the ones who carry the deepest scars are the only ones who know how to touch another's pain, without breaking it further. The door to room 306 was still open. Flickering yellow light spilled across Lucas's sweat-soaked face. The boy was curled into a corner of the wide, empty room. His crying had faded, but his breathing was still shallow and scattered. Rachel sat a few feet away, palms open on her knees. A quiet message: I won't do anything unless you want me to. A cold draft swept through the hallway, carrying the echo of hurried footsteps. The door flew open once more. A man stepped in, like a storm fresh off the floor of a global finance summit. His expensive suit still buttoned, cell phone clutched tight in one hand. Jonathan Bradford, who gave you permission to be in here? His voice was low, angry, controlled, but heavy enough to make Rachel stand up on instinct. She faced him without flinching. Calmly, she said, no one did. But your son, he was panicking. I just sat near him. I didn't touch him. Jonathan's eyes scanned Rachel, then shifted to Lucas. His brows furrowed slightly. The boy wasn't screaming. No hiding under the bed. No flailing. Just trembling breaths and drawn-up shoulders. And then something different. Lucas wasn't turning away like he always did with strangers. He wasn't shutting down, he was watching. His eyes were on Rachel, cautious, yes, but not afraid. Jonathan lowered his voice, still firm, still guarded. Step back. Now to Rachel slowly stepped away. She understood. This was a father's domain, and she was the outsider. But just before she reached the doorway, she said quietly, "Your son needs someone, not to command him, but to simply listen." The door clicked shut behind her. No thank you. No nod of acknowledgement. Just silence, settling like dust in the corridor. Jonathan sank to the floor, not too close, just near enough to feel his son's unsteady breathing. Lucas didn't look at him. His tiny hands clutched an old hand towel Rachel had left behind, a scrap of fabric, but the only thing he'd accepted in the middle of his breakdown. For the first time in months, Jonathan didn't call a doctor, didn't summon the nanny, didn't yell. He simply sat beside a child he'd never truly understood and tried to breathe in rhythm with him. A door had opened, not between two rooms, but between two people a father used to control and a child who'd never been truly heard. Rachel was no longer in the room, but her presence, quiet, kind, never forceful, still lingered in the way Lucas looked at the world. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere inside Jonathan, a realization was dawning sometimes. Being a father isn't about having the answers. It's about knowing how to stay. The next morning, Vermont was still blanketed in thick fog and fresh snow. The sky hung heavy in a dull shade of gray, no rain, just cold, so bitter that even the metal railings along the hallway were glazed in frost. The hotel was silent, as if nothing had happened the night before. But something inside Rachel had shifted. She wore her uniform as usual, white shirt, thin cardigan, a small name tag pinned neatly over her heart. Carrying her cleaning basket, she made her way up to the third floor, walking past the row of rooms just like she did every morning. But when she reached room 306, she stopped. The door was unlocked. Inside, no screams, no chaos, just silence, a fragile kind of peace. Rachel hesitated, then gently knocked. No reply. She pushed the door open just slightly, enough to glance inside. Lucas was sitting on the carpet. No yelling, no headbanging, no hiding, just sitting quietly, fidgeting with a piece of torn cardboard, folding and unfolding it into a clumsy rectangle. His eyes avoided contact, but they no longer held the same fear. Rachel stepped in, carefully, slowly, as if one wrong move might shatter the stillness. She sat down about 6 feet away from him. She didn't speak, didn't ask anything. She was simply there. After a few minutes, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small handkerchief. It had a single letter stitched into it. T, a gift from Tommy, the last one she ever received from him. She placed it gently on the floor, not pushing it toward Lucas, just leaving it there, a silent offering. Lucas glanced at it briefly, but didn't react. Rachel lifted her hands and made a familiar sign. Safe, a circle over the chest, a light touch to the heart. The same way she used to calm her little brother all those years ago. The boy didn't respond, but his hands stopped folding the cardboard. And then, just for a second, he looked at her. A fleeting glance. Then he looked away. But for Rachel, 1 second was enough. She didn't move closer, didn't say another word. 15 minutes passed in silence. Then slowly Lucas set the cardboard down. He reached for the handkerchief, pulled it toward his chest, and hugged it to himself, as if it were the only thing anchoring him to safety. Rachel exhaled, a trembling breath she didn't know she'd been holding, not from the cold, but from the quiet miracle she'd just witnessed for the first time. Lucas accepted something that wasn't born from panic. Just then, the door opened behind them again. Jonathan stepped in, still dressed for work, but his tie hung loose. He saw Rachel and began to speak, but stopped, because Lucas was holding the handkerchief, and he didn't flinch, didn't run. Rachel turned to Jonathan and said in a voice softer than the winter wind, "Can I stay? Just for a little while. I won't do anything, I'll just sit here." Jonathan didn't answer, but this time, he didn't order her out. He didn't give her a lecture. He simply nodded, slowly, then stepped back and gently closed the door behind him. Room 306, once filled with screams and chaos, was now still. Not because everything was fixed, but because, for the first time, someone had chosen not to fix, but simply to be. Jonathan sat alone in his office on the second floor, a space where everything was tidy, structured, and far easier to control than any emotion he'd ever had to deal with. Dark wood-paneled walls, an antique clock ticking steadily, and a warm desk lamp casting soft yellow light across the room, making it feel less like an office and more like a sealed vault of memory. In front of him, a computer screen full of financial reports, growth charts, and unread emails from partners awaiting his response. But he wasn't looking at any of it. He couldn't. Instead, his eyes rested on the edge of his desk, where a small handkerchief lay folded neatly, white plain, one single embroidered letter T. He hadn't asked Rachel what the letter meant, but what haunted him more was the image of Lucas clinging to that handkerchief like it was a lifeline in a flood. Even if only for a moment. It had been so long since he'd seen his son calm in that way. Not the numb silence of withdrawal, but a quiet with breath, with rhythm. Something that felt almost like safety. Jonathan sighed and walked over to the window. Outside, the snow was still falling, coating rooftops, blanketing the trees, resetting the world bit by bit in soft white layers. In his mind, images flashed Lucas's meltdowns, the doctors who came and went, nannies who quit after a few days. Each one with credentials, degrees, accolades. None of them had ever made the boy stop crying. And yet her, Rachel, with nothing but an old handkerchief and a pair of eyes that knew how to listen, had done what none of them could. Jonathan wasn't confused because she had broken through. He was shaken because he had built the walls she stepped through so easily. Walls made of control, walls made of the belief that with enough money, enough experts, enough strategy, anything could be fixed. But Lucas wasn't a problem to fix. He was a child, a fragile soul who didn't need answers. He needed to be understood. Jonathan turned back to his desk and opened a drawer. Inside, he pulled out an old photograph, one taken nearly a decade ago. A younger version of himself, smiling wide, holding a newborn Lucas in his arms at the hospital. And it wasn't the polite smile he now wore in boardrooms. It was real, radiant, unfiltered joy. He whispered almost to himself, "You used to be everything." But ever since Emma, Lucas's mother, had passed away due to post-surgery complications, Jonathan had retreated into structure, into efficiency. He rebuilt his life like a business plan, no time for grief, no room for error. And as Lucas's silence grew louder, Jonathan had gone quiet too. Until Rachel walked in, no knock, no permission, and brought with her something he hadn't realized he'd lost: gentle presence. Not to manage, not to instruct, but simply to be. Jonathan didn't say it aloud, but something inside him was starting to ask, if the only person who's made my son feel safe is the one I tried to push away, then maybe the one who needs to change isn't her. 2 days later, the hotel received a guest no one was expecting. She arrived in the late afternoon, just as the sun was dipping low and the snow on the stone pathway had begun to melt into glistening wet streaks. A black SUV pulled up to the front entrance. A woman stepped out, cream-colored coat, chestnut hair neatly pinned back, and eyes the color of steel, cold, sharp, unblinking. No luggage, no assistant. Only the composed presence of someone used to bending the world to her will. She introduced herself simply Claire Easton. A no staff member needed to check the reservation list. That name, it had once been splashed across every headline 3 years ago. A renowned interior designer, a former collaborator with elite hotel groups. Jonathan Bradford's ex-wife, and more importantly, Lucas's biological mother. Claire didn't ask to be welcomed. She didn't inquire if Jonathan was in. She just looked at the front desk clerk and said, calmly, decisively, "Tell him I'm here to take my son." When the message reached Jonathan's office, he didn't react right away. He sat still, fingers gently tapping the wooden desk. 1 minute. Finally he rose. No coat, no phone. He took the stairs down one step at a time, as if each footfall carried the weight of a past he wasn't ready to face. Upstairs, Rachel was with Lucas on the 3rd floor. The boy was carefully arranging color cards by shape, his lips pressed tight, brow furrowed, a rare expression of focused calm. Rachel didn't want to disturb that moment, but something in her gut whispered, something's about to change, and it did. A knock came at the door. Not the polite tap of hotel staff, but a firm, confident knock. A knock that came with authority. Rachel opened the door. Standing before her was a woman she'd never met but had heard about. Claire. The two women locked eyes. A brief moment, no words. Claire's gaze quickly moved past Rachel, landing on the small boy sitting on the carpet. "Lucas," she called. Not loud, but clear, like a command wrapped in silk. The boy looked up. No screaming, no fleeing. But he didn't move toward her either. He blinked, then looked down again, and returned to arranging his cards. A reaction devoid of warmth. Claire's posture softened just slightly. A quiet exhale rippled down her spine. Rachel stepped aside, but didn't leave the room. "He's focused right now," she said gently. "Would you mind waiting a moment?" The Claire raised an eyebrow, measuring each word like a chess move. "Are you his caregiver?" "Not officially," Rachel replied. "I'm just here when Lucas needs someone." "And who gave you that right?" "No one. And no one needed to." Rachel paused. "I'm not trying to replace anyone. I'm just doing what, maybe, someone should have done a long time ago." Stayed. Jonathan arrived shortly after. He didn't interrupt. He stood behind Rachel, his gaze no longer icy, but tired, guarded, and perhaps uncertain. Claire looked at them both, then gave a small nod. Not agreement, not refusal. Just calculation. "Fine," she said. "But don't think I'm walking away. I'm his mother, and I came to reclaim what's mine." With that, she turned, her heels clicking decisively down the hall, leaving behind the first ripple of a storm just beginning to rise. 3 days later, the morning at the hotel began like any other. Rachel woke early, brewed coffee for the housekeeping staff, checked her task list, then made her usual climb to the 3rd floor. Lucas was already waiting. He sat quietly in the corner of the room, his color cards arranged into the shape of a star. His eyes were brighter than the day they met, And when Rachel walked in, he didn't flinch anymore. Instead, he shifted slightly, a small gesture of welcome. Silent but genuine, Rachel sat beside him, starting their morning routine by pulling out a new puzzle, a yellow school bus, with window cutouts shaped like squares and circles, perfect for sorting and matching. They were immersed in play when the front desk bell rang below. It wasn't urgent, but there was something rigid about the tone. Before Rachel could react, her walkie crackled in her pocket. Monica's voice, the front desk manager, sounded hesitant. "Rachel, there's someone asking for you." And for Lucas. Rachel stood up instantly. Just then her phone buzzed in her hand. Jonathan's name flashed across the screen. She picked up. His voice was tight, urgent. "Come down. Now. Don't say anything to them until I'm there. It's social services." Downstairs, 3 well-dressed individuals were already waiting. Briefcases. Neutral faces, neither warm nor cold. Professional, efficient, emotionless. One stepped forward. "I'm Marcus Fielding, Vermont Child Protective Services. We received an anonymous report alleging possible abuse or neglect of a minor on this property, specifically a child named Lucas Bradford." For a moment, the entire lobby seemed to freeze. Jonathan arrived seconds after Rachel, no tie jacket in hand. He didn't waste time. He stepped forward. "Lucas is with me. I retain full custodial rights. He glanced at Rachel, is just a hotel employee. There's nothing inappropriate happening here." "Is that so?" Marcus replied. "We'll need to inspect the living environment. We may also need to speak with the child privately." Rachel's hands clenched. He's nonverbal, and he can't process stress from unfamiliar situations. Forcing an interaction could be extremely damaging to his mental state. A second agent cut in. "And who exactly are you to him?" Rachel didn't blink. "I'm the only person he allows near." Silence. Jonathan stepped forward again. This time, no hesitation. "You're free to check anything. Paperwork, security footage, staff records. But if you're meeting Lucas, I go with you." Marcus studied him, then nodded. The evaluation lasted 2 hours. They inspected the dining room, restrooms, recreation areas, and even the new therapy room Jonathan had quietly installed the week before. Everything was clean, safe, no violations, no signs of neglect. But just before leaving, Marcus turned to Rachel. "Do you have any idea who might have submitted the report?" Rachel said nothing. But inside, one name surfaced with crystal clarity. Claire. That night, Lucas couldn't sleep. He tossed in bed, eyes wide open, clutching the stuffed animal Rachel had given him. No crying, no screaming, but unease hung heavy in the room. Rachel sat beside him, gently stroking his back, repeating the hand sign again and again. "Safe, safe, safe." From the doorway, Jonathan stood quietly, watching. And then, for the first time, he spoke. "We can't let anyone do this to him again." Jonathan had never considered himself a weak man. His entire life he'd been taught that silence was strength, that emotions were a luxury reserved for those without real responsibility. In business, he was the closer, the one in control, the one who made others falter, never the one caught off guard. But that night, as he stood in the doorway of Lucas's room, watching his son curled up beneath the blanket, eyes wide open, silent but sleepless, Jonathan felt helpless. Rachel was still by his side. Her hand rested gently on Lucas's back, each stroke patient and rhythmic, no urging, just presence, soft and steady, like a quiet shadow beside the storm. He had hired therapists, consulted experts, paid for top-tier caregivers, yet it was her, a woman with no credentials, no degrees, no titles, who calmed his child. When Lucas finally closed his eyes, his breathing steady, Rachel looked up. She didn't speak, but her eyes resolute, unwavering, asked the question Jonathan could no longer avoid. "How long are you going to let this continue?" The next morning, Jonathan changed his entire schedule. He canceled 2 meetings, reassigned all tasks to his assistant, and called his personal lawyer, not to defend, but to fight back. "I want to know who filed the report," he said, "and if it was Claire, I want every shred of evidence proving this was fabricated. No settlements, no compromises." The lawyer hesitated. "We'll need time to verify." Jonathan cut him off. "Do it now. This isn't just business. This is my son." That same day, he contacted 3 law firms, a private security firm, and a PR crisis expert who had once cleaned up scandals for senators. He demanded full background investigations, a timeline of events, and legal strategy to counter any attempt to use Lucas as leverage in a custody battle. Not mediation. Litigation. That evening, he went to Rachel's room. She was folding Lucas's clothes, placing them neatly into drawers when Jonathan walked in. He stood there for a moment before speaking. "Thank you for not leaving. After everything." Rachel looked up. "I didn't stay for you," she said calmly. "I stayed for Lucas." Jonathan nodded. "No defense, no denial, I know. And I know that if I don't act now, I'll lose both of you." He walked over and placed a thick folder on the table. The cover read, "Petition for Co-Guardian and Emotional Caregiver Authorization." "It's a draft," he said. "I want you listed as Lucas's co-caregiver. It's not a full legal document, just an internal family authorization. But it gives you the right to be there, to make emotional and therapeutic decisions for him, without needing my permission. Rachel said nothing. Jonathan added, I don't just want to employ you, I want Lucas to have someone he trusts. And I want to learn how to become that person too. She looked at him. Really looked, and in the eyes of the man who once needed control more than connection, there was something new: humility. She nodded slowly. Okay. But only if this is for Lucas. Not for image. Not for redemption. Jonathan gave a small smile. For the first time, this isn't about me. And so, things began to change, not overnight, but little by little, starting with the smallest act: listening. That morning, a light rain fell over Vermont. Not the kind of rain that made noise. This one was gentle, persistent. The kind of rain Rachel had always thought of as nature's lullaby, a quiet soundtrack to peaceful moments. Lucas woke earlier than usual. He didn't curl under the blanket like he always did. Instead, he sat up quietly, legs dangling off the bed, his small hands clutched around a faded brown teddy bear. Rachel entered just as he was tracing soft, invisible circles on his pillow with his finger. She sat down like she always did, at a careful distance, not too close, not too far. Good morning, Lucas, she said softly, her voice gentler than the rain tapping at the window. He didn't reply, but he looked at her, just briefly, long enough for Rachel to know today something was different. She reached into her bag and pulled out the emotion board. Small cards with cartoon faces showing different feelings: happy, sad, angry, anxious. Lucas looked over the board, then slowly pointed to the one with the smiling face. Rachel smiled back. You feel happy today? Lucas gave the smallest nod, and for the first time, he held eye contact, not hiding, not shrinking, just present. Rachel opened a picture book. It was called First Day at School. She didn't read aloud. She just turned the pages slowly, letting her finger glide across the images. Lucas inched closer. His eyes followed the drawings. Then his small hand landed on one page, a boy waving and saying hi. There was silence. Then Lucas looked up at Rachel, and he spoke, a tiny voice, like wind brushing across still water. But it was real. Rachel. Just one word, 3 syllables. But it felt like the entire room tilted on its axis. Rachel didn't react right away. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her eyes stayed calm. Did you just say my name? She asked, her voice cracking slightly. Lucas nodded. He didn't smile. He didn't say it again. But his eyes, they lit up. Rachel placed a hand on her chest, then pointed at him. Sign language for, I see you, I hear you, I heard you, thank you. Behind the half-closed door, Jonathan had been standing for a while. He had only planned to stop by. A quick morning check-in, but instead, he witnessed something he had only dared to dream of for the past 2 years. One word. But it was proof. Proof that Lucas was still here. Beneath the silence, beneath the meltdowns, beneath all the misunderstanding. There was still a child who loved, who remembered names, who was learning, little by little, to reach out. Jonathan didn't enter. His hand over his chest, as if trying to hold his heart together. In his eyes, there was no CEO, no grieving husband, just a father standing on the outside of a small miracle. Rachel turned when she sensed someone behind her. She met his gaze. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. They had both heard it. One word, one door, one new beginning. The gates of the Windham County Courthouse closed behind Jonathan with a resolute click. He stood still for a moment, eyes lifted to the overcast Vermont sky. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the ground was still like his emotions. No longer a storm, but far from calm. Beside him, Rachel walked quietly. She no longer wore her cleaning uniform. Today, it was a simple earth-toned sweater, warm and soft. Looking at her now, no one would guess she was once just a housekeeper in Jonathan's hotel chain. She stood like a mother in the middle of a battle she was never asked to join, but no one else could have taken her place. Inside the courtroom, the light was cold, casting an even divide between two opposing sides. On one side sat Claire Easton, poised, polished, gold-rimmed glasses, her private attorney seated beside her. On the other side, Jonathan, with Rachel and his own lawyer. The judge was a middle-aged woman, stern face, steady voice, completely impartial. Claire spoke first, calm, composed, her voice never wavered. I am Lucas's biological mother. Over the past 3 years, I've rebuilt my life, stabilized my career, and completed psychological treatment. I'm now ready to be a part of my son's life, something I wasn't capable of before. Her lawyer presented a thick file of documentation, medical records, employment verification, a clinical psychological evaluation. Rachel listened quietly. She didn't flinch. When it was Jonathan's turn, he didn't talk about wealth or real estate or business empires. He simply played a video, captured on his phone one quiet morning in Lucas's room. The footage was simple. Lucas, sitting on the floor, fitting puzzle pieces together. Then his voice, Rachel. No background music, no editing, just a child, saying a name for the first time. The name of the person he trusted. The courtroom fell silent. Jonathan raised his head. His voice was steady but full of weight. Lucas doesn't need someone to claim him, he needs stability. He needs someone who understands him. Not through reports or test scores, but through presence, through time. And that person is not me. And it's not Claire, it's her. He turned to Rachel. Rachel didn't give birth to Lucas, but she was the one beside him during his worst moments, when no one else dared get close. The judge sat quietly for a moment, reading over the files again, then looking up at Rachel. "Ms. Green," she said, "are you willing to serve as an unofficial guardian with the agreement of both parents?" Rachel drew in a deep breath. "I don't want power. I only want Lucas to have the space to grow in his own way. And if it takes staying, I'll stay. Until he no longer needs me." Silence. Then, the judge closed the file and nodded. "This court grants the following: primary custody remains with Mr. Jonathan Bradford. However, with mutual consent, Miss Rachel Green is recognized as the emotional caregiver, a non-legal role, but binding within the household regarding all decisions concerning Lucas's well-being." Claire didn't speak, but her expression softened for the first time. It was no longer the gaze of someone seeking to reclaim. It was a quiet recognition that sometimes real love isn't defined by who gave birth, but by who stayed when everything else fell apart. The sun rose earlier than usual that morning. Soft light spilled through the third-floor window of Bradford's Summit Hotel, brushing gently against the cream-colored walls and the scattered, childlike drawings taped unevenly across them. Outside, birds chirped faintly on the balcony, water dripped steadily from the bathroom sink, and the rhythm of a peaceful morning filled the space, quiet, ordinary, real. Rachel woke at 6 as she always did, but today she didn't get up right away. She stayed still, letting herself absorb every sound around her, a new habit she'd learned from Lucas. Sometimes, instead of rushing through life, you just sit still and listen. Lucas no longer woke up in fear. Most mornings now he would sit up on his own, quietly studying the toy bus on his desk, playing with it by himself, and if the morning was especially good, like today, he'd even walk out to find Rachel without being asked. The door creaked open. Rachel. She smiled, eyes soft with recognition. "Good morning, Lucas." The boy stepped closer, holding a piece of paper, a drawing he'd insisted on finishing the night before. 3 stick figures filled the page, one tall, one with long hair, and a small one in the middle, each one holding hands. Rachel reached out and brushed his hair gently. "This is your dad, me and you, isn't it?" Lucas nodded. "Family," he said, the second word he'd ever spoken out loud. Right then Jonathan appeared, holding 2 cups of coffee, black, no sugar for him, and one with cream for Rachel. He said nothing at first, just sat beside her, looking at the drawing Lucas had proudly placed on the table. "He's learning so fast," Rachel said quietly. "Yeah," Jonathan nodded, "and teaching me more than any professor ever has." They shared a look. No more words needed. The misunderstandings, the anger, the guarded walls that once kept them apart, had been replaced with something else: presence. Not as business partners, not just as parents, but as 2 people who had simply chosen to stay. Outside, the snow had mostly melted. The bare branches were beginning to sprout their first green buds. A new season was coming, quiet, unannounced, but full of promise. Lucas ran out onto the balcony, pointing upward. "Birds," he called, louder, clearer than the day before. Rachel and Jonathan followed. High above, a flock of small birds flew past, each wing beat a note in the gentle morning symphony. No one said it aloud, but they all felt it. The battle for the child was over. What began now was the journey with the child. No one here was perfect, but in a world full of noise, 3 people had chosen to listen. And sometimes, to heal a soul, all you need is a morning like this. There are things in life no one ever teaches you. You only learn by walking through them. Like how to listen to a child who doesn't speak, like how to sit with someone who doesn't show their grief, or how to open your heart, not to control, but to accept that sometimes what people need isn't a solution, but a presence. Rachel wrote in her journal on the final night of that year, "We don't need to save anyone. We don't have to enter someone's life as a hero. We just need to stay long enough for them to know they're not invisible." Her life had once flowed like a cold stream, quiet, closed off, carrying old scars that never quite healed. But Lucas changed that, not with words, but with silence so deep it made you slow down, sit still, and learn to touch the world with your heart, not just your ears. She used to think that children like Lucas needed healing, but she came to realize they are the ones teaching us how to heal ourselves. On the final morning of the film, the air was still cold. Snowflakes floated lazily against the frosted glass. In the ground floor dining room, 3 people sat around a small wooden table. Jonathan carefully poured milk into Lucas's cereal bowl. The boy, as always, sat upright, his eyes fixed on the way the flakes swirled slowly in the white milk. Rachel placed a plate of fresh pancakes on the table, pouring syrup in slow. Everything moved, gently, as if even time had decided to pause, just for a moment. Lucas suddenly looked up, his eyes lighting up at the winter sunlight streaming through the window. He reached out, tracing circles in the air, murmuring something only he could understand. Rachel tilted her head, listening. Jonathan simply smiled. No one asked him to speak. No one expected him to explain. They just sat there, together. A father learning to let go of perfection, a woman who once felt invisible, and a child teaching them both how to listen with their hearts. Outside, the soft sunlight spilled across the window pane, casting golden lines of warmth through the chill. No background music, no dialogue, just a scene of three people having breakfast and feeling seen. A family, not the kind they ever imagined, not perfect, not traditional, but real-life lessons don't always arrive in dramatic moments. Sometimes they come in a glance, a gentle touch, a whispered name, just enough to say, "I'm here and I see you."